One of the most famous artifacts that's still in the Jorvik museum today is the coprolite, is the Viking poo. That's probably one of the most popular things for the tourists to go and see. I suppose one thing with Vikings kind of being baptised is it's difficult to know how seriously they might have taken it. Yeah, they're a bit more obviously drunk, aren't they? Hello and welcome to Echoes of History. I'm Dr Caitlin Ellis and I'm Associate Professor of Nordic Medieval History at the University of Oslo. So I'm an expert in medieval Scandinavia, Britain, Ireland, the North Atlantic, Vikings and their whole world. Today I'm delighted to take you on a tour of some of the many places that you can explore as part of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So today we're in Viking York, or Jorvik as it was called then. This was a time when there were sort of Christian Anglo-Saxons and then pagan and converted Norse kind of living side by side. We will start at the temple of the Norse god Forseti and we'll walk around the famous Coppergate to the game's recreation of a Roman amphitheatre. And then we'll end our tour at York Minster. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to like and subscribe and share with all of your friends. So here we're at a kind of pagan Old Norse temple, which I think is called Forseti's Rest, so a temple to this god Forseti. It does look quite stave church-like, so we have these from several hundred years later in Scandinavia, these really beautiful wooden churches. Some of them have lasted a very long time and maybe have to be preserved with tar and so on, so they're kind of against the elements. Today that's the site of Clifford's Tower in York. York is obviously a city with kind of lots of different influences, you know, originally a Roman city, Arboricum, and then we're not, I guess, quite sure how much continuity there is between, you know, this kind of garrison fortress in the Roman period, and it's somewhere where a lot of emperors visit as well. I think one of them dies there. Is it Constantine? I've forgotten. You can cut them. Yeah, we've still got some Old Norse being recited or being spoken by characters in the background. The swaying is kind of interesting. I guess they're presumably in some sort of trance or really kind of going with the worship. Maybe some offerings perhaps here in front of the idol of the god, maybe a kind of a wolf skin and a bear skin, and lots of kind of skulls of birds and things being used. So yeah, our sources for Old Norse paganism are sadly a bit lacking. Yeah, we have the Christians describing what they think paganism is like, and yeah, we just kind of wish that we knew more, really. It's kind of interesting they've maybe chosen a less well-known god. You know, they haven't gone for Odin or for Thor or for Freya, or maybe they want some variety, but I think he's supposed to be the kind of a god maybe to do with kind of like justice and kind of rule of law, even as the son of Balder and Nanna. So Balder being one that is kind of killed by Loki through some schemes, almost in a slightly Christ-like way, we might even say. But we're not even necessarily sure that there were that many actual temples in this period. Adam of Bremen talks about this big temple at Uppsala, and Uppsala being the big centre where all of these sacrifices would take place and so on. But probably a lot of this kind of worship could just happen in the home, or maybe if it was a bit more communal, it could happen in one of the big longhouses, the big halls. There's not necessarily a kind of a sort of equivalent of priests, a kind of a class of professional religious workers in that way. So it might often just be the chieftain who's kind of leading things like that. Probably also some worship might just happen outside. You know, we have some sense of there being you know, kind of groves in trees and just sort of particular places in the landscape that they might kind of associate for whatever reason with a particular god. Maybe places where there's kind of burial mounds and so on, and some of those mounds could be, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years old and kind of pre-Viking. So yeah, the idea of a temple could be sort of slightly more of a kind of a Christian way of looking at it, or as I say, maybe drawing on kind of classical paganism, sort of Greece and Rome, where obviously you have these very impressive stone temples and so on, that some of them still survive today. A bit warmer here obviously than in Norway, a lot less snow, a little bit, some sunshine. Yeah, the styles that people are wearing in York, there's still quite a lot of similarities to in Norway in this kind of basic way of doing things. They've got the woman in the more kind of wimple kind of head covering. That's something that we do have some evidence for in England at the time. Obviously sort of kind of veils and shawls and head coverings and these sort of dresses, men in kind of maybe knee-length tunics and so on. And obviously you have lots of cloaks and kind of furs and other things for warmth and different layers. Some kind of trade going on, and maybe it's a bit of buying and selling. I suppose one of the ways that this looks quite different to the places that we were seeing in Norway is we've got these big kind of brick structures and the stone. So yeah, it's difficult to know how much would have been left from when York was a Roman site, how much of that would have survived. We have this famous Old English poem called The Ruin that's sort of more so to a Bath in the south that kind of talks about these ruins still being there, but we're not really sure if the Anglo-Saxons, if the English kind of really kept inhabiting those places, or they just kind of let them go to ruin. Yeah, a fair bit of Old Norse being spoken, maybe a bit of a mixture. Yeah, so the Great Army, or sometimes called the Great Heathen Army, had captured York in 866, and it was on a holy day as well, on All Saints' Day, and that's actually something that's quite interesting that we see happening a lot, that the Vikings are recorded as attacking on some form of holy day, either just a Sunday or maybe kind of Christmas or Easter, something like that. So that obviously implies that they have kind of started building up knowledge of all the people that they're attacking, that they're kind of gaining all this information. So yeah, that's kind of really fascinating. And I guess also that there's a strategy. They're not just kind of, mindlessly like attacking people, that they've maybe thought about when would be a good time to strike, as it were, that people would be kind of distracted. Sometimes also maybe they're taking a lot of slaves and people to kind of trade, which is something that's kind of uncomfortable for us to think about. But then you'd have a lot of people gathered in one place in a church. So that is definitely a tactic that we know that they used kind of across Britain and Ireland and the continent. Yeah, so after this attack, we get a lot of Norse settlement in kind of northern and eastern England, sort of all kind of Northumbria, East Anglia. Later on, it will be known as the Dane law, so like the area under the law of the Danes. Danes sometimes is just used in this period to kind of mean all Scandinavians, that they're all speaking the Danish tongue, although we might maybe say Old Norse or something like that today. So yeah, some of them are just kind of settling down and farming, but obviously a lot remain in York probably as well, and that becoming or continuing to be a real kind of trading centre. So it was Ethelwich under the Anglo-Saxons, and then now the Norse call it Jorvik, which obviously is where the name York comes from today. A lot of trading centres obviously being on the River Ouse, and the kind of Coppergate area seems to have been an area that had a lot of kind of production, kind of craft working, metalworking and so on. And we've sort of found there were a lot of excavations there in the 1970s, 80s, lots and lots of things were found, all different sorts of artefacts and from different places as well. probably some kind of jewellery making. There's kind of beads, kind of amber and jet, things like that. I feel like probably one of the most famous artefacts that's still in the Jorvik Museum today is the coprolite, is the Viking poo. That's probably one of the most popular things for the tourists to go and see. Yeah, if we've got like a little remains of a plinth or something there, kind of some of the, maybe showing some of the old Roman structures still remaining, but we've obviously got a lot of wooden constructions and we could see lots of planks maybe ready for transport somewhere else perhaps. Yeah, York would be kind of continue to be a really important city that would be kind of fought over between kind of different Viking leaders, some of them coming from Ireland. Later on we have what we call the York-Dublin dynasty, so they might rule both at the same time, but not always, and lots of strong economic links between the two places, between these two kind of trading centres, and also then English kings starting to try and take it over from the south, so it does become a very, very important place. And we have a Roman statue remaining there, a very, very large one. Even a bit of an amphitheatre from the look of it. So we kind of assume that there was an amphitheatre in York because we know there were some elsewhere, Chester and Kylo and things, but archaeologists haven't actually managed to find where exactly the amphitheatre was in York, so we haven't proved its existence, but I suppose it's reasonable to assume that there would have been one. Is it juvenile with the whole bread and circuses idea, you know, that's how you keep the populace happy with some entertainment and so on. And obviously I guess the Colosseum would be the most kind of, in Rome would be the most famous version of an amphitheatre, and there's maybe some slight influences, echoes there. Yeah, some nice, very distinct kind of Roman columns there as well. Some people dancing in the corner. Don't know if they're practicing for something or we're just supposed to assume that they're feeling merry. They're a bit more obviously drunk, aren't they? Probably at this time it was actually a useful source of carbohydrate, actually, of kind of nutrients for people to drink beer or ale, kind of coming from cereal. Yeah, so beer being made of barley, maybe some other cereals, probably consumed in a lot higher quantities then than it might be now, and probably more than water as well. So, you know, water might kind of be unsafe, you know, unless you've got kind of a fresh spring or something, a really good supply of fresh water. That's something obviously that you can very easily end up kind of getting diseases from, particularly in a kind of more densely inhabited area. So actually it could kind of have been safer in this period to be drinking alcohol and things like that. And yeah, it's something that we do hear a lot in kind of the literature, as maybe being part even of a warrior culture as well. You know, the feasting in the hall and the kind of the merrymaking and celebrating kind of after a battle and so on. Same for mead, which obviously is a lot stronger, maybe more of a treat, and obviously has honey in it, although there might have been a bit of honey and kind of other sort of flavourings, herbs and things added to some of the beer as well. But mead being stronger, that's sort of very big in the Old Norse material that we talk about. The mead of poetry is used as in the myths quite a lot, so that's something that kind of has some sort of cultural cachet, I suppose, is sort of supposedly kind of providing inspiration to people when they drink it and so on. Okay, so I guess we're kind of inside the amphitheatre now, so you've kind of got all the seating, but they're kind of the steps in between, so you can get to the different levels there. Some music being played, some entertainment, a kind of stringed instrument, maybe some sort of like a harp or a kind of lyre equivalent, maybe. One person likes it, only one person's clapping. Some food maybe here as well. Again, I suppose we maybe most associate Vikings and Anglo-Saxons maybe in this period as eating a lot of meat, saying this kind of feasting capacity, but probably a lot of their food would have been kind of cereal based or kind of pottage, kind of peas, maybe a little bit of meat for kind of flavouring. It would have definitely been a bit more of a treat probably, and yeah, maybe a bit more of a kind of high status thing, or you maybe have to eke it out for a bit longer as well. Hear a little bit of the kind of background dialogue and things. So as we could expect somewhere like York to be somewhere where there was a real kind of mixture of languages being spoken, presumably Old Norse and Old English at least. And one advantage is that those should have been somewhat kind of mutually intelligible because they're both kind of Germanic languages, they're kind of on the same family tree, so there is a kind of direct relationship between them. So they should have at least been able to kind of communicate if they maybe just concentrate a little bit. And we do have quite a lot of loan words from Old Norse into modern English today, and we can see kind of place names and things as well that maybe kind of use a bit of both languages. So presumably some people would end up being quite kind of bilingual or able to kind of operate to an extent. Some nice bunting. I don't know if that's very historical. And some garlands. And so in the Roman period, obviously as being part of the Roman Empire, that's something very, very international. So there probably would have been people from kind of all over Eurasia, all over the world even. Are they arguing or are they going? From all over the world there. And then, through these Viking trade networks, there's also a lot of international contacts too. Say we find objects from the Middle East and so on amongst from the excavations of Coppergate. It's kind of an interesting outfit that she had, very kind of covered up with our kind of Viking art styles on it. But then, sort of nuns and priests didn't really necessarily have special clothes to wear, but they were just supposed to be, somewhat demure, I guess. And we still have these kind of brooches, these kind of oval brooches that I mentioned previously, but we've kind of got chains linking them as well. Still, some more colourful clothing with some dyeing going on. Originally, these English would have been worshipping kind of similar gods to the Norse as well. There's kind of Germanic paganism, Odin being Woden. There's kind of that shared heritage in a sense, and some of the Vikings are coming from places not so far away from where the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes came from when they kind of invaded England. But obviously that was a few hundred years earlier, and they converted to Christianity a lot earlier too. One of the interesting things is that Viking kings of York would start to kind of mint their own coinage as well, which maybe also shows the importance of the kind of the economic angle as well, and also I guess why so many people wanted to rule York, what makes it quite appealing to take over as well, and the West Saxon dynasty, sort of Alfred's dynasty, but a couple of generations later when they've got Wessex and Mercia, they kind of continue expanding north. So Athelstan and his successors make various attempts at York and kind of extending their sway. Northumbria maybe always has some slightly kind of separatist, kind of independent tendencies, as it were. Sometimes they seem to prefer to be ruled by a local, even if it's a Viking, compared to maybe someone from the south, perhaps. And it's when we're thinking a lot later of the kind of so-called second Viking Age, or the later Viking Age, where we have the kind of second wave of sort of Viking attacks and invasions. York is still sort of important then. So when Harald Hardrada, the Norwegian king, when he tries to invade in 1066, he's initially doing quite well, right? He's initially kind of successful at Fulford and around York before being defeated at Stamford Bridge by Harold Godwinson. I guess is maybe a natural place then for Harold to kind of start his invasion, even if it doesn't go according to plan in the end. Lots of nice carpets, haven't they? I don't know if we know anything about carpets in this period. Our popular image is obviously kind of Vikings, pagan Vikings versus Christians, that they're kind of deliberately seeking out Christian targets, maybe attacking monasteries. But there's probably a practical aspect to that they're quite wealthy and have lots of nice shiny stuff that you can steal, and maybe not that well defended either. Some of them are in nice remote locations by the sea as well, so that's helpful. But I think it's really interesting in the game how they do show that there is some kind of coexistence between the two groups, and to some extent we can think that in all of these written sources that they maybe are a bit antagonistic, or they view the Vikings as like a punishment from God. It's like a sign of the apocalypse, and they will use this kind of religious language about heathens and pagans and so on. But I think in reality there would have been more coexistence, particularly amongst kind of merchants and people who kind of have to travel more internationally, and obviously there could be fighting and warfare within different groups of Christians, neighbouring kingdoms and so on. So we shouldn't only see conflict as being kind of along that dividing line and nothing else. So this probably is a kind of transitional period in which some of the Norse maybe would convert Sometimes we talk about syncretism, this idea that kind of there's like maybe a bit of a blending of beliefs as well. I guess similarly to since they've had the Romans in there so much that when the Romans come to Britain, they start kind of hyphenating in a way. They're kind of finding a Roman goddess that's like a British goddess and kind of smushing them together to kind of help in the kind of conversion process in a way. So there could be things like that going on. This is very long, sorry. Yeah, so I think there's some really interesting things about the way they've presented it, and I can see kind of where they've been have done their research and kind of borrowed motifs and kind of elements from different places, but obviously they're kind of reimagining them, which is kind of understandable for storytelling. I suppose maybe I would expect there to be more people, maybe these really kind of bustling streets, unless because it's winter, maybe they're all inside because it's cold, but as I say, we get the sense of this trading and craft working and all this stuff going on that maybe you'd expect there to be a few more people. These ones are a bit more kind of spaced out, and that is a very well preserved Roman statue, so maybe that's a little bit unrealistic. The hands outstretched, usually they're the first bits that break, I think. Having the river as kind of the heart of the city probably makes sense. Transport and travel by water and bringing in goods is so crucial. We can hear some bells ringing. I think earlier we saw some really large bells. It's a quieter kind of soundscape in general, maybe in the medieval period, so big bells clanging would be quite noticeable. People could hear it. The whole point was that people would hear it from all the surrounding area, of course. Okay, we have a kind of more Celtic cross, as it's referred to, when it has the kind of the circle that's sort of in the shoulders of the cross, as it were, and very ornately carved. So we do have various examples that would look kind of like this from Northern England, which would be reflecting the Christian history of the city. York obviously goes on to be one of the archbishoprics, York and Canterbury. I think according to Bede, they were supposed to kind of be even, have half each. The northern diocese, the bishoprics, and then Canterbury in charge of the south, but Canterbury was sort of preeminent for most of the period. So this is the Minster that we have, this very kind of imposing building. You might know York Minster today looks very different. It's kind of even bigger and grander and kind of more of a Gothic style, or a kind of later medieval style. And when Bede is writing in the start of the 8th century, he refers back to Edwin having a wooden chapel built, and Edwin of Northumbria, the king, is one of his big heroes of kind of Christianity. So there probably at least was some form of church here, but maybe not quite as grand as this one. And Minster as a term is an Old English term that we kind of have at least from the 7th century. It's just a borrowing from Latin monasterium, so like monastery, but it's kind of used for all sorts of church kind of buildings and institutions. Now we're hearing some Latin, a kind of classic kind of prayer, religious Latin about our Lord. So I guess it's kind of nice that they did actually include the Latin at all, the language of Christianity, the language of the book. And I guess here it looks like we're having someone being baptised. Not quite sure if the person on the side... Oh no, they are happy. I wasn't quite sure if they were angry for a minute. Part of Christianity is, there's this kind of missionary idea that you need to spread Christianity and convert other people. And that is something that crops up quite a lot in our written sources as, this kind of religious difference maybe being one of the tensions between the two groups. I suppose one thing with Vikings kind of being baptised is it's difficult to know how seriously they might have taken it. Do they kind of genuinely change their beliefs, or do they just do it, because it's the sort of pragmatic thing to do? So there's a really fun episode from a writer from the continent, a Frankish writer, Notker the Stammerer, talking about lots of them being baptised at the court of Louis the Pious. And they kind of give them the baptismal, the white robes, and then they run out because they've been converting so many people. And then one old man is very, very angry and sort of says, "Oh, well, I don't want to wear this kind of sackcloth that you're trying to give me. I wanted my nice new outfit, my nice new white robes." And he says, "I've been baptised 20 times already." So he's obviously getting a new change of clothes each time. And obviously you're not supposed to get baptised more than once. So then he says, "Oh, you can take your Christ along with this sackcloth." So that's probably just meant to be humorous, but it might kind of tell us something. There might be a little grain of truth maybe in how people thought some of them might not have really been taking it seriously. Or maybe they just add the Christian God as kind of an extra God within their kind of sort of looser and more flexible beliefs, perhaps. This is a very nice grand stone building. Oh yeah, there also seems to be someone lying on the floor. Maybe they're dead, unless it's one of the drunken dancers from earlier. So yeah, we don't really have that many stone buildings from the Anglo-Saxon period. There maybe weren't so many to begin with, but just obviously it's a long time in terms of preservation, or other buildings might be built on top of them, in whatever the latest fashion was. Kind of slightly more simple arches here, obviously the cross and the altar kind of central, and some kind of wall paintings. We do have, again, not something that necessarily is often well preserved, but that may well hold true. And actually I suppose the fact that we've got kind of little manuscripts and scrolls maybe as a nod to this idea about Christianity and Latin and literacy being kind of really closely intertwined. We do have a Latin poem by Alcuin. He's also the person that writes about the attack on Lindisfarne. So he's a churchman from Northumbria. So the very end of the 8th century, he describes the Bishop of York having a nice new church, and saying it's kind of wondrous design and kind of lofty building supported by strong columns, curving arches, and kind of gleaming. The ceilings and the windows, it shines, and has 30 altars and so on, which maybe is a little bit, exaggerating for poetic literary effect, but I suppose it could be that the sort of game designers have kind of are nodding to that, perhaps. But it does seem like some people, Scandinavians, people of Norse origin, probably did convert quite quickly. So we have the famous example of Alfred the Great and Guthrum, one of the leaders of the Great Army. So he converts as part of their kind of alliance, their kind of settlement, that Alfred sort of stands as his kind of godfather in a kind of spiritual sense, but maybe also gives him that little bit of political hierarchy, you know, that I'm kind of above you. So there's various kind of motivations maybe for then converting to Christianity. Kind of politically, it might help you. Maybe if you're a merchant, it's kind of easier to trade with Christians, or just easier to kind of live side by side with them. And maybe the idea that Christianity kind of gets associated with a more kind of powerful, kind of centralised kingship, more kind of institutions, and with literacy. So all things that could kind of start to help you build your power. And kings within Scandinavia also kind of start to cotton onto that in the following centuries as well. We are getting quite a lot of these kind of remains of the Roman ruins. I guess they're leaning quite heavily into that. There's a few places there where we kind of had an arch and it looked like it'd been like filled in with the bricks on the side of that building. So maybe they're sort of trying to suggest a bit of reuse. And I mean, reusing bits of masonry is definitely something that we can see. Even runestones and things in Scandinavia, some of them we have preserved because someone put them in the wall of a church. I suppose the Romans are also very popular as well, sort of in media and in all these kind of representations. Maybe they kind of rival the Vikings for one of the more popular kind of historic peoples, so perhaps they kind of enjoyed getting to marry the two together. The recreation as a whole is really interesting. They're sort of drawing on a few different influences. Maybe it's a bit grander than it would have been. Obviously, this is quite soon after they had captured York, so it might not have sort of been quite so built up yet. And as I said, we're not sure how much of the kind of the Roman ruins and the Roman buildings still would have been standing, actually. Switching to modern English now to get your pies here, which I enjoy. I must admit, pies is something I always crave when I go back to the UK. I associate with home having a proper pie and pastry. I guess this is maybe more the defences around York. Other times I guess we can see the Vikings using kind of a curve in the river or some kind of natural defence to kind of help so they don't have to build as big a wall maybe. And I guess at Repton they're kind of reusing an old Mercian monastery as kind of part of the enclosure. And in Ireland we talk about long forts that kind of are forts around the ships, around the longer. So that is something that we can see, that particularly at an earlier stage, if there's not an existing kind of little urban settlement for you to take over a town, if you're kind of raiding, you maybe still want to pause. Maybe the very early stage you just do hit and run and leave immediately. But if you decide you want to stay in an area a bit longer, you are going to want to kind of have some form of defence around you and your ships. And I guess gradually over time that might then build up into something quite substantial if you decide to stay. We talk about overwintering as well, that if you decide to stay over the winter, over the season of bad weather, rather than going back to Scandinavia, then you might kind of entrench yourself a bit more and kind of dig in, and you're going to need to be able to repair things, repair your ships, or make lots of other things. So you maybe kind of start building up more like an ordinary settlement rather than just a kind of a military camp. Got Otto without the dog. So I guess that is the end of our tour of Viking York. Thank you very much for joining me as I explored the recreation of the Viking past in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. You can go deeper into the history that inspires the Assassin's Creed games by watching weekly interviews with historical experts, all on the Echoes of History channel.